Hello,
We're back again.
he's Shabazz.
He's Pete Marshall, and this is Cryptchat UK. And today we were going to have something else, but we're going to have something else for you instead. And Pete will explain why.
We were going to have the wonderful Ellen, and she's not feeling so good today. And we're going to talk to her next week, so it's not off the
Hang
card.
on, hang on. Don't make any promises you can't keep.
Fair.
We're
We've
going to
already,
speak to her sometime very soon.
yes. So
And
this,
could you just say who Ellen is? We're not speaking to Ellen DeGeneres.
well, you may not be speaking to Ellen DeGeneres.
you know, uh, people who don't know, she's the author of The War on Disabled People.
Yes.
Is that right? So yeah. So this topic, the last minute substitutions, shall
a,
we
a,
say?
a little bit like they're interesting and we care about them, but like anyway. Uh, so
Anyway, what are they?
essentially, um, this week, as part of my we were hosts of the We Are Disabled Twitter Twitter account, and we basically I decided to do some like live tweetings of some films. I thought it was fun anyway. So basically, um, I did chocolate, and no, that is not chocolat. It is a film called Chocolate, also called Zen Warrior Within, which I have no idea why it's called Chocolate. Honestly, that is the biggest mystery of the entire film. Like, there isn't even that much chocolate in any part of the storyline. Like, honestly, I'm fairly certain they just had like a random noun generator and they just went and it just came up with chocolate. It is a story that makes the most sense as far as I'm concerned.
What year was this film made?
2008,
Okay. And
and
just for the record, for the audience and for you, Pete, I've not seen either of these films. To my shock and horror,
well, both of them are excellent films, and I would advise it.
I'm
But
sure I'm sure I'll find out during this conversation. And what first thing I wanted to ask you.
sorry, just to say, the other one is Shock Treatment, which is a 1981
Oh,
film, which is about which basically um basically it's a film about a dude who gets put in kind of some mental treat put in a mental institution through like a reality TV show. And I'm not gonna say any more, but it is very good.
and what year was that film?
1981.
Okay, and we should tell people that there will be spoilers probably in
Yeah.
just to be on the safe side. I don't like to tie you up in knots, other than physically. But,
Well, we keep that to outside of the podcast.
well, you can. But yeah, so just to let people know that people that haven't seen these films, that there will be spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled on either one of these films, go watch the film first, and then come back on and listen
Yep.
to them. Uh, yeah, my first question was going to be through live tweeting this. Uh, I assume this is the first time you've done something like this, right?
It's the first time I've live tweeted stuff. It's not
Yeah.
the first time I've seen Shock Treatment
No,
or either of those films, but it was the first time I've live tweeted stuff, and it was honestly, yeah.
had anybody else who interacted with you seen those films that you know?
Yeah, yeah. Um, especially Shock Treatment. Like there was a guy who just started who we were having a conversation as we were watching the film, and I enjoyed that. That was quite cool.
All right. So we'll begin with shock treatment, right?
Hmm.
first, and do you want to give us a short synopsis of the film?
I mean, I've already like given a yeah. I suppose in terms of like this is a strange film for a kind to be referenced as a disability film because in some ways there's only one disabled character in it, one again physically disabled character in it. None, I think, with mental difficulties. Again, you could argue the main character is supposed to be awkward and nerdy, but like if you want, you can read into that neurodiverse, I guess, but like neither of those things are inherently neurodiverse or exclusively neurodiverse. So yeah, and basically it's about a non explicitly uh explicitly kind of normal person who is put in an institution, which in some ways is a slightly which and actually the only kind of disabled character is actually like this guy who might be blind. Again, this is an entire topic that actually me and this other guy were chatting about. But like, honestly, the blind character, like, he starts off like if like the first half of the film, he is explicitly like he has glasses and a white cane and blah 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 blah. I'm slightly curious. I don't like. I find it slightly difficult to work out whether he is thematically a person who is faking disability, or B, a person who is disabled but gets conned halfway through into thinking that he's not disabled. And again, both of these have slightly different kind of thematic resonances. And but honestly, the problem is the I don't it's there isn't like the last half of the film where you would actually find out which of these things is true. There's actually no like way of working out which one is actually true. So I don't know which one of those two things is true. But yeah. But yeah, in general, it's reality TV kind of mental health. So think it's supposed to be kind of a pre Dr. Phil pastiche of Dr. Phil. Um,
And were you going to say something else, or was that?
yeah, that's
Yeah, I was thinking, uh, what makes you say it's a disability film? What makes you confident that that's the case?
honestly, in that sense, it talks about. There's kind of multiple things in the sense it may talk about disability as an idea, I think. And again, there is a disabled character probably in it. Um, he's not. He's one of the villains, and I have to say, I think he's slightly awesome. Although I'm not entirely sure how he fits which of the two possibilities in terms of themes he fits into. Um, but yeah, honestly, in terms of like mental health and its and kind of social acceptability and how that with uh, fits in with what is healthy. That is I think the kind of the one sentence underscoring in terms of the mental health theme, because basically all the way through it every all the way through it like it's basically explicitly stated that there are these doctors and these nurses and these psychiatrists and there's all these people as marriage counselors, and basically in this like actually they're all played by actors, and because everyone believes them, like they have they end up they end up having all this power, and actually which actually has nothing in itself to do with training, and that's not to say that a actually fully trained and equipped um, doctor, nurse, psychiatrist, psychologist wouldn't do a lot better. And I'm not in itself. It's not saying I wouldn't extend it so far as to say that all mental health is nonsense. But in this, it is creating a world in which that kind of idea is true. And I don't know, it never like actually contrasts good mental health to bad mental health in that sense.
What? So, what would you say the overall message is of the film?
I mean, honestly, this is one of the more interesting things that I'm not sure that. I mean, one of the interesting elements of it is that it it's trying to create a reflection, I think, more than have a message. I mean, one of the interesting elements of it is the amount that it binds together disability. There's an entire conversation where they're talking about where where there's these two parents, and in one conversation they managed to make one of the an impressively offensive conversation, which contains both, which contains they start, as soon as he gets put in this mental institution, they both start bitching about him and saying how weird he is, and how dangerous he might be, and it becomes a who's who in terms of like um in terms of people talking about mental health like they're a dick. um but also they start that they they go into homophobia, and they go into racism, and it's basically just a smorgasbord of all of them. And in that sense, it's interesting because one of the first songs, they specifically have a line where they talk about this entire town as being like a microcosm, like this is the Jerusalem of the West, I think is one of their specific phrases. So certainly in terms of the theme, the film is trying to create more of a mirror on society. Again, it's arguable that like uh so I would say that it's that I'm not sure that reading it as just having a straight message is correct, probably. But yeah, so it combines a whole bunch of ideas which I think are combined far too rarely. And
What message did you take from it?
you could take about 10 different messages from it. I mean, one of those interesting things for me was actually how predictive it was of kind of Donald Trump. Like one of the major characters, like the basic like um the character who's supposed to be kind of the Roger Ailes of this particular network that has this program that controls this guy, is basically who puts this guy in a mental institution, is basically this guy. It's this guy's twin brother who basically the who became a millionaire. I think the twin, and I think he had a rich family, the one who's now head of this kind of network, and his twin brother had a poor family. And then but basically, like, if you go all the way through this film, like, there's an entire song called "Me About Me." It is the most narcissistic song you've ever heard in your life. It is a really it's just insanely narcissistic. We're just like, I can't be any more me than me. And it's just like, and honestly, in some ways it's very stupid, but in other ways it's weirdly, it's narcissistic. And all the way through this there and all the way through this so basically you have this kind of narcissistic millionaire, and who's supposed to be this weird aberration of the American kind of aristocracy, and who has like loads of family issues, because yeah, he's fucking around with a member of his family for like basically no reason, spending millions of pounds, and ruining that dude's life. So I mean that element of it is quite interesting. Honestly, it has a very distinct like storyline about people getting led on.
Okay.
There and there's entire sections where there's an entire song which is basically about like, yeah, which is basically about like, the monorail song in The Simpsons. It's basically that, but before The Simpsons.
Yeah. Yeah, I watched the trailer for that film, and I thought it had a very camp aesthetic to it.
It was like the entire thing was made by the same people who made Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah.
It is a musical. Like there is like, and honestly, all the songs are great. But like, yeah, if you don't get on with that very campy aesthetic, then you probably then yeah, just give the film a miss. You're probably not going to gain anything massively from it.
And what year did you say it was made?
1981.
81. Did you say it was a disabled actor in this film or not?
None of them visibly disabled.
Okay.
I mean, I will say that that part of the reason why I'm not entirely sure about the guy who's supposed to play a blind character is because, in my view, he plays him pretty badly. I mean, one of the weird things is that, like, basically halfway through, he kind of abandons his stick and that lot. And honestly, there's two ways of reading this. That A, the guy was never disabled or blind in the first place, and he's just been faking it. The second is that he is a blind person who is now just faking being not blind.
Right.
And one of the things that does that, and honestly, he gets around. And the problem is, he gets around fine. And so, on the one hand, you could say, well, that doesn't that imply that he's not blind? And I would go, well, to be fair, if you look at him when he was using his stick, he was mostly using it to like find where the ground was rather than navigate, I think. And again, I'm not blind, so in some ways, like, I'm not an expert on this topic, but equally, like, I wasn't able to work out like whether he was just badly acting a blind character, or B, whether he was or so I would strongly advise that was not a blind actor.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like it to me. But have you ever watched it with any of the disabled people?
Excuse me.
Have you ever watched this film with any of the disabled people?
um no, I've tended to go for like slightly obscure stuff. So
Okay. Is there anything else you want to say about this film?
um
I'll
no.
say that as a no. That's a suitably long silence there. Uh, in terms of your experience of live tweeting this, uh, how did you find that?
It was very weird in the sense that, like, both things I ended up live tweeting, like Rocky Horror Picture Show and sorry, shock treatment was much easier in the sense that it was A, in English, and B, it was predominantly a writer's orientated film. Basically, 90% of the story was in the writing, and it that's not to speak down to the actors' abilities or the, like, honestly, all of it was good. But you could basically just end up picking out individual lines that were just awesome, and they were just awesome, and then just like live tweet those, which honestly, like, I don't know, made my life easy. Um,
Do you think the dialogue was well written?
honestly, I think the writers have gone to amazing amounts of effort on this. I actually loved that element of it. Um, yeah, and honestly, loads of the songs I've just been listening to slightly obsessively. um, um, yeah.
How,
So honestly, that was kind of a very. But when you got to like chocolate, it was an entirely different experience in the sense that the autistic character is largely non-verbal.
hang on. Before we go
Sorry.
on to that film, what made you choose this film to live tweet this film?
Slightly because it's obscure. Like, I don't like. I wasn't that interested in like doing like I don't know, Forrest Gump or something that was, or Rain Man or something that was just fairly obvious and like, you know, more people would have seen it, but then why am I doing the live tweeting?
Did you,
No one is gonna no one's gonna watch the film because if they haven't already watched Forrest Gump, then me live tweeting it is not gonna like make them want to watch it.
yeah,
Although I might want to bitch about Forrest Gump at some point, but that's its
yeah.
own topic.
Probably Forrest Gump and Rainman, probably. Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, Rain Man, I've only really got one major. There's like one massive flaw with Rain Man, and that's that basically the guy's just kidnapped throughout the entire film, and everyone like both in the film and honestly like most of the audiences don't actually like pay that much attention to the fact that Rain Man is basically kidnapped throughout almost the entire film. It's like, well, this is okay because this just happens, right? I don't know. I've never been kidnapped. Like, I would advise that it's something that society should probably disapprove of. But yeah, that's the only real statement I've got to say on Rain Man. So apart
All
from
right.
that,
At least you've said that now. Then that is important to say, really. And shall we move on to chocolate?
yeah,
Okay. What year was this made?
2008. Yeah, 2008.
Is it is it a foreign language film?
It's Thai.
Okay.
So I will just warn everyone preemptively
Yeah.
that I am fairly certain that if I myself was Thai, then I would be able to read into a lot more about there's basically all the way through the film. There's an entire thing around between Japan and Thailand, and as a Brit, I don't know enough to really work out what are the finer points of things that they're saying because Zin herself, she is a girl with Thai and Japanese heritage, and like in the end, she ends up living with her Japanese father, and there's a couple of scenes. And like one of the major fighting scenes is started by this like there's a Gongoro girl, there's like a whole bunch of like Japanese kind of pottery and things like that. So I'm fairly certain that I'm supposed to take something from all of that, and I'm not entirely sure what it is. So, yeah. So there's a certain amount of bluntness to my interpretation that like might be lacking somewhat.
How many times have you seen this film?
Um, 18 or 19. Honestly, I kind of love it.
Well, that's good. But what do you think it is that you love about the film?
Because it basically this is one of the few like, and again, there's kind of first off there's kind of the demographic elements of it that like there is a female main character in an with autism, blah blah blah. I mean, you could say that she's Thai, which I think she is, which I'm not sure in her own, like if you're in Thailand, that's not exactly a minority community. So you could argue that, so there so there's all that. I think honestly, it's one of the few films I've seen with an autistic main character that the autistic main character isn't kind of basically like her autism is not really the obstacle. Like actually, like to be honest with you, you probably could write out the autistic section and just have a film about a girl whose mother is, yeah, basically the storyline is her mother is dying of cancer, and basically she has to pay for treatment because no NHS. So so she just and her mother was a gangster who gave some loans out, and so she ends up just going to like three different people and like picking up the loans, get and smash cut all like none of those people are that keen to pay back their loans. So yeah, um
So I guess that this is a musical then.
no, this is a martial arts film, so they're both very different films. But yeah, so but basically like so that film works just fine if that's the storyline. But the fact that she's autistic and it does change the ambience of things because it because there are some absolutely wonderful character moments. Because one of my favorite things about this film is they basically transformed like instead of making autism kind of the obstacle in this sense, they made autism into kind of the um
Superpower?
I would say they they basically had some absolutely wonderful character moments. So for example, one of the like there was a very subtle I'm not anyway there were one of the like post fight scenes they have her they have her lining up Smarties by color,
Yeah.
which honestly is like a very small thing, but that is an autistic thing. Or like when her mum gets when her mum gets cancer, like she basically she wants to continue her routines, and then she accidentally pulled off her mum's wig because she didn't and then she absolutely freaks out, and that causes and to be fair, she doesn't like it. Like, despite the fact that she knows martial arts, this isn't like she doesn't use martial arts on anyone because they actually know what differences between a meltdown and like fighting. But anyway, um, and so you have and basically in like the scene, and so basically like after like things calm down slightly in the next scene, like she ends up like cutting off her hair. Um, kind of in sympathy with her mum, and it's just and honestly like there's just so many like subtle moments like that honestly there's not it's not like people don't spend like 90% of their time like talking about autism, and I'm not um and again it's in the blurb that she's autistic, but actually in the film I'm not sure the word is actually mentioned. But having said that, actually, like in terms of just the physical acting of it all, and in terms of like it is basically like it is written so well into the script that it's just that yeah.
Yeah. So would you say that this is uh, autism depicted on screen in practice rather than people just talking about autism?
Rather than just autism cut and paste into a film.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like one of the more interesting elements of the film is that in some ways, like you have there's slightly two endings. You have the kind of the martial arts film ending where um bluntly you have the martial arts film ending where she wins all of the fights and blah 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 and she gets the money and all that. But like there's also kind of I would say the kind of the autism ending where spoiler alert, her mum dies, and she ends up going to live with her father. And honestly like it's and honestly like this is one of those things that like actually this is one of the other things about this film, which it on the one hand doesn't like you know she's amazing at fighting. Like the fight scenes in this film are just spectacular. Like apparently they spent 2 years training the actors and everyone to do these martial arts scenes. You know, you know, it is they are really good. But in the end, like it's like her martial arts skills don't actually like guarantee that she's gonna, that she's not actually a superhero, and like her life is not just like made perfect by martial arts, by her martial arts skills.
Mm.
So, and honestly, I also think that it's interesting in the sense that it doesn't. Sorry, I had a thought there, and then
Should I just ask you another question? Or do you want to think about that?
yeah, it basically it also doesn't like make it also like, she's not a failure for her ending up living with her parents. No part of, I would, it's hard to argue, she beat every opponent that she went up against. You know, there was no, but basically like in that sense, like shit happens. And
I have I have I have one or two wider questions for you because I'm just interested in drilling down into a bit of like what it is that makes you go back and watch this film over and over again. Because I'm not saying, that is just what you do, and people have certain films that they do that with. I have certain films myself that I do that with. So I'm just interested from the a filmmaking perspective and a psychology perspective as to whether you've ever thought about like what is it that makes you keep going to back to watch that film. I'll let you answer it and then I'll give you and I'll ask you some more questions about trying to get to probably why you think that is.
I mean, this precise film, I mean, partly it's, I mean, partly it's just the fact that I kind of have a soft spot for kind of B movies. And basically, this is a B movie with an autistic main character in it. You know, um,
Does that how old is this girl? Does it have any sex in it?
no, not really. I mean, to be honest with you, like this is one of the kind of autism-y kind of things that, like, honestly, she barely speaks.
Alright.
She has about, if she spoke more than 10 words, 10 different words in the entire thing, like. So honestly, in that sense, like she had like there is a kind of there she has a stepbrother, I think, or a brother who kind of um who does some bits um and who does some bits and sometimes drives her around.
Yeah.
But honestly, like sometimes he can't help, and then she just gets on with it anyway, and that kind of thing. So so yeah, there is there actually so basically beyond like her conception, not really, no.
Okay. So is she like a teenager?
Yes.
Uh,
It's quite hard to work out her age actually, but she's probably in her mid to late teens.
and the other thing I want to ask you is how much do you identify with the film? Do you identify with the spirit of the film or what?
Um the spirit of the film.
Like the overall like themes or message or you know you know I'm just interested.
I think they have relevance.
Yeah,
As for whether they have relevance to my life or something, or some question more precise than that, like
yeah.
I would like to, I would like to think that I'm good at some things. I would probably like my skills to have like
Would you like to be a martial arts expert, for example?
no, like honestly, given the amount of effort that it always looks like it takes, like it, I've no, not really.
And the other thing I was interested in is what you thought of its because I haven't seen it. I just want to reiterate that the film's depiction of an autistic character dealing with grief and dealing with the loss of a parent. Does it do that very well? Does it?
I mean, there's probably two separate discussions on that because first off, because what is depicted in a great deal of detail is her response to her mum having cancer.
Yeah,
Because basically, there's that, and then there's the other section, which is kind of her mum dies like 99.9% of the way through the film. And then after that, there is one scene that kind of sets up the fact that she goes to live with her dad and, you know, they're fine.
yeah,
And so basically, so in that sense, like I would say I can talk in some detail about how she dealt with her mum having cancer.
yeah.
And I can't talk with that much detail about like her about the kind of her mum dying.
No, no. But like, I'm not. I'm just wondering because it's taking me back to like the double empathy theory
Yeah,
and all. You know, I'm just coming at it from that kind of angle. Like, does it kind of does it kind of incorporate those kind of
I mean, I
ideas into it?
I mean honestly, like in that sense, it I think it does a very beautiful thing in terms of like she is a human being. This
Yeah,
is her mother. Like honestly, like yeah, find it yeah. And honest in the sense that like it doesn't like treat this as if it's psychological like in any sense like she's psychologically like weird for going through grief. I think what's also good that it does is that it like portrays that in different ways. So for example, like one of like what I mentioned earlier on about the hair, like like one of her kind of major experiences of her mum is kind of her hair because when they hug like that.
yeah,
And honestly, like, and so when she loses her hair, she absolutely like that's the trigger for absolutely freaking out.
yeah,
Oh, I anyway, having a meltdown. Um, and it's the same when and earlier on in that scene, like she like they have a routine. She goes
yeah,
out on that day,
yeah,
and they cannot do that because the mum is too sick. And in that sense, like and in that sense like she and in that sense like that's kind of the preemptive thing
yeah,
slightly before that. But honestly, there's also like a hospital scene where she wants to go home and she wants to go home with her mum,
yeah,
and her and Moom, her brother, just end up sitting in the hospital for about 3 or 4 hours because she's just like, well, I'm just gonna wait here. If mum's staying here and I want to go home with my mum, I don't want to go home without my mum. Therefore, this is where we're sitting. And honestly, like I think that's an interesting scene, especially if you compare it to similar scenes in Forrest Gump. Because if you look at that scene, one of the weirdest things about that film is that basically it's two films shown side by side. You have one film which is Forrest Gump's life. He has an awesome life. He does some amazing stuff. He does some stuff that's really impressive. And then you have him and then you have um him talking to Jenny, and then you have him kind of sitting on park benches talking to random people. Where
yeah,
honestly, they just spend the entire time like treating him as though as though he's weird and as though like oh like what like as though they're being generous for doing this and doing stuff, and it's just a bit like. And honestly, if you look at the people's faces all the way through, he's telling these stories. Like they're just like, what on earth is happening? You know. and honestly, like this, I think happens a lot in in films where a disabled character is acting in a way that other characters just, or in a way that kind of a normal person, in a way that an audience member might not immediately expect. Now, it's worth pointing out that normality in films is always treated as like a two-edged sword. Like no hero in any story is normal. You know, okay, in the occasional film, if normality is especially admired, then, but basically, like, James Bond was never normal. Indiana Jones was never normal. So, in that sense, talking about the way the audience surrogate treats the thing is relevant. Um, and basically, like, to take this right back to chocolate and to take this right back to the scene I was talking about. Basically, Moon just sits there with her and just bees there with her, which, and there's and
So would you say that's, uh, for want of a better phrase, artistically authentic? You know.
I mean, as for how you deal with grief, like how, like, as a person who has like two of my grandparents have died,
Yeah.
that is not how I dealt with grief. I will tell you that much.
Yeah.
Having said that, um, it feels like that is the way an autistic person might experience grief.
Yeah.
And I think like that's kind of what you would, unless it's unless it's a biography or an autobiography,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
wouldn't expect it to be like that's not, yeah.
Yeah. What I mean to say, obviously, no one person is the same as anybody else.
Yeah.
What I'm saying, within that kind of like world, you know, that it seemed to kind of authentic to you in terms of like how it potentially could be dealt with.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. Um, yeah. And none of the characters judged her for it, honestly, is kind of, yeah.
and since we're in the mode of getting gripes off our chest, any more any more gripes with Forrest Gump?
I mean, most of my gripe with Forrest Gump is one big gripe, which is that it's two films. Well, actually, no, there's two big gripes with Forrest Gump.
Okay, go on.
The first one is that one of the more like, basically, here's some backstory behind what Forrest Gump is.
Yeah.
The reason why like someone like Forrest Gump would even conceivably be within the army, because is basically literally because there was a thing during the Vietnam War called McNamara's Army. And basically, this is a program where they got low IQ individuals, and that's their term, to go basically to put them in the army. Now, this was a spectacular and unmitigated failure for many reasons. But for this context, I am simply going to say that honestly, from like a human rights perspective, like putting, again, if you want to argue that maybe some people who with low IQs might want to join the army, I mean, maybe, but they were like drafting people and saying that that wasn't actually a legitimate reason to not be part of the army. And especially given the fact that at the same time, lots of kind of very rich people were getting out of being drafted into the army. It it is it basically, it seems like it was eminent. It seems like it was an incredibly immoral act, and the fact that they were just like, and the fact that they didn't even vaguely try and judge it or vaguely try and be like, well, this is fucked up, seems a little odd.
Yeah.
So That so honestly, like the fact that so yeah, they treated it as though yeah, of course Forrest Gump should be in the army. Like, why wouldn't he be in the army? I don't know, because he doesn't really understand the context of his actions and doesn't really understand what on earth he's doing. Like, again, just a guess.
Yeah.
Like, that's not great. Like, it's not great if that's the you know. Anyway, I'm not sure that's in keeping with human rights. Um, the other one is that I mean the other one is that basically it's roughly speaking two films like welded onto each other because honestly you have Forrest Gump who does a whole bunch of amazing stuff, you know, effectively by about half to two-thirds of the film you have a presidential candidate on your on your hands. Like, why not? Like, honestly, if you look at something like George Bush, then he did a lot less than Forrest Gump, and he was and he was a presidential candidate. So like, honestly, he is not a normal individual. Um, he is an exceptional individual. But then you get all of the scenes where he was like where he was sitting down telling people his story, and the fact that people were just treating this as though, what on earth is this person doing, you know, as though there was this implication that they could there's this implication that they could and should judge him. There was this implicate, you know, honestly, like I like essentially like it's also weird how they treated Jenny, because like they consistently treated this as though it was, I think running joke is probably being too harsh, but basically, but certainly as though like it would, as though like, well, of course she didn't want to go out with him, and of course like you know, and it was just one of those like, well, like why? Like, and again, if you want to go, but sometimes she just didn't love him and that was just life. Well, that's not how the film treated it. And honestly, like when she came and lived with him at the end, like that was the happy ending. To which my question is, really? That's the happy ending? Like, is that what the entire film was about? Basically, like what the film was about is him what the film was about is him going and the film was about him going through all these like amazing experiences and doing all this amazing stuff in his life, and it was about all he needed to do was work his way up high enough, and all she needed to do is get AIDS, and then they're at the same level, and then you know they could get married and live together. Like that's the happy ending here. Like that's again, I don't exactly know, like that's the ranking system we're using. Okay, I guess so. Vietnam vet, Olympic athlete, you know, athlete, trendsetter, and CEO, and all she needed to do was get AIDS in order to like. So that's what he had to do to earn her, and what she had to do was get AIDS. I mean, okay. I mean, and again, like in some ways, if they hadn't have treated that as though that was the happy ending of the entire thing, if that you know, if you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, if they hadn't treated it like it was a happy ending, then I would have less questions. But like, I don't know, yeah.
But going back to these films, uh, in Chocolate, the main actress, she wasn't autistic, right?
I'm fairly certain she wasn't.
And do you
It will,
remember?
I will say it would be interesting to find out what her research was, because as I said, she spent 2 years training, and again, they specifically talked about martial arts, but again, training for the role in
Yeah.
that. And honestly, like I am, you know, I would be,
Because,
you know, given how good she was, I would be shocked if that didn't involve a lot of actually talking to people with autism. You know,
because
maybe she's just a savant at these things.
because it'd be really fucked up if they spent 2 years doing martial arts training and in
And
two
then it's
weeks.
just like, yeah, let's do 2 days with autism. It's fine. We'll be
Yeah,
great. Like,
I'm not saying that happened, but
no.
I'm saying that if that was the case, then it's pretty fucked up.
Yeah, it was. Although I'm also kind of shocked because they were actually right, apparently, or at least they were right in the sense that they got it a better
Yeah, yeah,
representation than like
yeah.
almost anything else. So like, fuck it. Like, what can you do? You're
Well, I'm
apparently
just
not
thinking
entirely
about it
wrong.
in terms of yes, the Sia film again,
Yeah, that's got some incredibly mediocre responses just from like normal film critics.
and yeah, but I'm just thinking about it in terms of that context, and
But
in terms of
yeah,
getting an autistic actor.
yeah.
And,
I mean, honestly, like it. Yes, it would have been better if it had an autistic actor. It would have been like there are critiques to be made,
yeah,
but honestly, like I mean, basically, I think where what I'm kind of interested in kind of combining these two films, especially given the title of Disability Punked, is I think both of these films have tackle kind of disability themes in very different ways. In the sense that shock treatment generally talks about what is ordinarily a kind of mental health is ordinarily kind of disability, broad disability theme, but actually from a political perspective. It talks about it from the perspective of collective decision making. It talks about it from the perspective of like how of like who the audience is. It talks about it from the perspective of what is the story that that society is kind of creating or sustaining in this. I mean, the reason why it's important, the twin storyline and the fact that like the fact that like the CEO of this particular media thing is, basically as much as you can say that could you take that out? Well, I guess. But the question is that if you don't care that much about kind of how mental health is being treated, then basically you are sustaining people's lives getting ruined and bad people basically gaining money from their badness, and that's just what's gonna happen. And if you it kind of brings what is ordinarily quite a kind of niche idea into front and center of, is this the kind of society you want to live in? And comes up with some really good songs around that as well. And so, because yeah, basically it's like you could take you could just say the entire thing is a broad Pied Piper storyline, or a broad kind of bad person tries to ruin someone else storyline. But honestly, like if the society in question had a good attitude towards mental health, then honestly neither of those storylines are even viable. So the second one, so honestly with chocolate, so that kind of takes disability and makes decidedly more, I think, cool and decidedly more interesting and decidedly more fun. It is a very campy film. And honestly, when it comes to chocolate, it's another one of like generally one of the generally one of the more interesting things about it is it has a very morally ambiguous character. Because basically, like functionally speaking, she like her mum made illegal loans functionally to a whole bunch of people, and then she just goes around beating them up for their money. You could functionally speaking have an excellent action film entirely based around the inspector who was trying to work out who she was in order to arrest her and put her in jail. You know, you could turn her into an anti-hero. And so um, this is a decidedly more this is not kind of Forrest Gump or Rain Man. This is a much more morally ambiguous character who is again supposed to be cited in a morally ambiguous world. I mean, society again chose to live in a place that did not have a national healthcare system. So when someone's mum gets cancer, they're poor, then what options do they have? And so Breaking Bad was made on very similar premises, honestly. You know, so honestly, I think so this is so yeah, I think these films deal with, so yeah, this is kind of the reason why I chose these films, because I thought they were absolutely fascinating in the sense that they deal with disability in a very um in a
So do you
very
think? Do you think? Do you, sorry? Did you want to finish what you were saying there?
no, that's fine.
Yeah. So in a way, do you think that these films do demonstrate that disability is punked?
It can be. I mean, it
Ah,
depends on the film you're looking at, but I think it can be very interesting, very subtle, very complex topics, which yeah.
yeah. Is there anything else you want to say before we end
Um
about these two films?
I'm good.
Okay. And on that note, we'll bid you farewell. Bye bye.
See you people. Bye.